have to really work on is I always want to look at the video of myself and not the camera.
We had 5 more minutes. I could give you some TV lighting.
Oh, ooh, make us like shine. It's super loud in my ears, actually. Do I fiddle with my own volume, or is that?
I can turn it down. Say when.
Okay, keep going. I'll let you know. Let you know. I'll let you know a little more. Let you know. Hello, hello, everyone. I mean, that's tolerable. It's still pretty loud in my ears. Like it's a.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to turn it down.
Yeah, no, it's
You did great.
sounds still the same.
One. You have one.
Hello, 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 hello. Sounding in my ears. Hello, hello. That's good. That's good. That sounds good. Okay.
You
Yeah.
actually reverse the headsets, but it don't matter.
So we're actually live and streaming right now. So, thank you. We're all good. So we're doing a little crossover thing. So it might be a little awkward here at the beginning while we get set up. But we have an actual live stream going while we're going to record an episode of Eat Sleep Code, and hopefully we'll have some folks in our chat room able to ask questions live.
Live Q&A.
Live Q&A. We're just waiting to see if we can get some listeners to show up here, and then we will start the show.
Sounds
So
great.
I'm just waiting for my wonderful producer to text me and let me know, because they're supposed to raid from another channel. So let's see what's happening here. We got 2 already. All right.
Hopefully not with pitchforks. Like
So
it's
now we're starting to get some folks in to the show. So I am joined here by somebody that you guys may have recognized before. This is Mr. Daniel Roth.
Hi, everyone.
Dan is program manager for the ASP.NET stack. Is that correct?
I'm one of the program managers
One of?
on the ASP.NET team. There are a few of us, but yes, I've been working on ASP.NET for a good number of years now. Actually, it's amazing how that's flown by. It's been super fun, especially these years recently with the stuff we've been doing with Blazor.
So actually, let's kick this off the proper way, because we're going to actually record this as a podcast as well. So if people aren't watching the live stream, they can tune in from their cars. So we're going to start this from the beginning, guys, in the chat room. So 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to Eat Sleep Code, the official Telerik podcast. This is a special edition of Eat Sleep Code. We're live at Build 2019, and joining me today is Daniel Roth. Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello. Well, sure. Yeah, I'm a program manager at Microsoft. I work on the ASP.NET team, on the broader .NET team. I've been doing that for a little while now. Pretty much my entire career at Microsoft, I'm working on .NET, and it just keeps getting better. Yeah.
It definitely keeps getting better, because we're going to talk about one of our favorite new frameworks today, and that is Blazor. For the folks listening on the podcast, we have a live Q&A stream going as well. So we've already got people cheering us on, so you may hear some weird names getting shouted out, like Bite Me is cheering us on right now. Chris Santi is saying Dan Who, being a little cheeky there. Thank you, Chris.
I thought that was a Doctor Who Doctor Who reference.
So Blazor, you had a session on Blazor yesterday.
I did. Actually, it was broader than that. It was ASP.NET Core 3.0, because we just shipped .NET Core 3.0 Preview 5 earlier this week, which includes a bunch of Blazor stuff. So it was also a Blazor talk as well.
Yeah, I said that because unfortunately I was busy interviewing Scott Hunter yesterday.
You missed my
unfortunately,
talk?
but unfortunately I missed the talk. Fortunately, I was interviewing Scott Hunter, but I did miss the talk, so I wasn't sure exactly what it was about. So there was some Blazor in there. There's some ASP.NET Core goodness as well.
What it was is a talk about doing full stack web development. Like you want to build everything from the front end to the back end with .NET, and how .NET Core 3.0 and Blazor now gives you a story for pretty much every piece of the application that you want to build. You have your client-side browser code that you want to write, rich interactive web UI. What do you do for that with .NET? Well, now we have a story for that with Blazor. On the front-end server, we've always had ASP.NET Core, MVC and Razor Pages, SignalR, web APIs, security. But then when you get to the back end, you want to write back-end services. Like say you just want to write a worker process that's may or may not even have any endpoints. What do you do for that with .NET? What's the story? We have a new worker template in .NET Core 3.0 that's built for long-running worker processes that uses the same generic hosting abstractions that we use in ASP.NET Core. So you still get the same logging abstractions, dependency injection,
Nice.
config, but with it's basically just like a lightweight console app though, with those hosting services built in.
So it's like a microservices starter kit.
Exactly, yeah. So if you want to have something that's just like popping off a queue and then doing some work with those messages and then sending something off to somebody else, that's what that worker template is for. And then for your service-to-service communication on the back end, what do you use for that? I mean, you could use just normal HTTP and web RESTful style services, HTTP services with JSON. But for back-end service calls, that kind of feels like a little bit of overhead. Like, can you do something more efficient? In 3.0, we've made a big investment with a collaboration, actually, with the community to improve the gRPC support for .NET Core.
Oh, good.
So we've got a nice built-in template for gRPC. We've been platting the services stack on top of the ASP.NET Core server stack, and then of course all the code gen based on your protobuf files, so that you get a strongly typed RPC programming model for dealing with back-end gRPC services. So we showed if people seen the Blazing Pizza app, there's a Blazor workshop that we put together. It's public on GitHub. You can find it at aka.ms/Blazor workshop. We took that UI app. That app's just the front end, and we added a back end to it. Like the orders, when you order a pizza, it goes into an order queue, and then you have worker processes that pull off the orders and prepare the pizzas, and then they hand it off to another queue for delivery, and then a delivery process actually handles delivering the pizza, and all the back end worker processes send notifications to the front end Blazor app to give order status to the user.
I think this stuff is really important because I hear a lot of questions from people that ask, so I'm shipping my DLL down the pipe. That means all of my IP related code is in there and it's running in the browser. And somebody could use a Telerik tool called just decompile and take that apart and see my IP code. And it's like, well, just run it in one of these worker services. If it's that sensitive, like, don't ship it down the wire, do it on the server and make a call to it.
Well, you don't even necessarily need to go all the way to a worker process. Like the worker processes are like these back-end processes that are kind of behind your front end. If you don't want to ship the code all the way down to the browser, just use server-side Blazor. Use Blazor for server. Yeah. In that mode, your components, your code is still running on the server. The only thing that's going down to the client is a little bit of JavaScript code that sets up a SignalR connection back to the server, and then sends all the UI events to the server. The components then run. They do their normal rendering. They calculate the DOM diff that needs to be applied. That gets then serialized back down to the browser and applied to the actual DOM. In that mode, there's no DLLs or .NET anything that actually ends up in the browser. You're kind of treating the browser as a thin client. It's just a thing for rendering some UI. And a lot of people like that, like people who are nervous about their IP, their code going down to the browser. The server-side Blazor model is really appealing to them. One demo we often do is with ML.NET, where let's say you've done a lot of work to train using machine learning a model that does something useful, like we typically do, like sentiment analysis or something like that. But it could be anything, and that machine learned model is that's part of your IP. That's an important piece of differentiator for your company potentially. You don't want to necessarily download that to the browser and run it in the browser, because then you've just given it away. With the server-side Blazor model, you can just run the ML.NET model on the server and then just apply the UI remotely, effectively back down to the browser.
Yeah, we've got a lot of feedback, not necessarily questions, but people. This is actually really good feedback, though. When they say things like, "It's a shame the session couldn't be longer and go a bit deeper."
Yeah.
You had a lot to pack into an hour.
I did, and there was, to be honest, there was a lot more that people wanted me to try and to shove into that talk. Yeah, this Built conference has been interesting because we opened it up to the broader community to do talks. So it's not just Microsoft talks at Build this year. It's lots of other folks giving talks on other topics, which has been great. But it did mean that for telling doing our standard Microsoft talks, we kind of had to cram in a bunch of things into fewer sessions. So we didn't have like a standalone Blazor talk to be able to do, go as deep as we want. This was a broader ASP.NET Core 3.0 session. So yeah, we had to go kind of fast. So you might want to watch it at half speed on the recording, because I did have to
Drink
churn
from
through a
the
lot of
fire
things,
hose, right?
and there were so many things that I wanted to do that just didn't fit, unfortunately. But
So Lewis Hendricks has a great question, and I'm gonna rephrase a little bit to make it a little easier on listeners. Can you explain what is shipping and when? So, for example, what is the GA for server side, and what is the expectation for client side?
yeah, absolutely. So server-side Blazor, that's the model we just talked about, where the components run on the server and all the UI is handled over a SignalR connection. That is shipping in .NET Core 3.0. It is in the box. .NET Core 3.0, the roadmap for that was all announced this week. There will be a go live release candidate release of .NET Core 3.0 this summer, so like July. You can expect to go live with server-side Blazor for the first time. We're basically releasing .NET Core 3.0 every month. So we just shipped Preview 5 in May. There'll be another Preview 6 in June that will have a bunch more new features. The Preview 7 is going to be the release candidate. That's go live. In August, there'll probably be a second release candidate, like a follow-up go live release, and then in September it will GA. And so .NET Core 3.0 will be in production in September of this year, and it will include server-side Blazor. That means the entire component model is in, and the entire server-side Blazor hosting model. In parallel, we are still working on client-side Blazor for WebAssembly. And in fact, we release both simultaneously, because client-side Blazor uses the same component model as server-side Blazor, so it depends on it. Like you need 3.0 in order to use client-side Blazor. So every time we ship a 3.0 release, we'll ship a client-side update. Those will continue to ship together throughout the 3.0 release. The support for WebAssembly won't ship with 3.0 and won't be ready in the 3.0 timeframe. It won't be done by September.
Okay.
It'll ship sometime later. We haven't officially announced when. We have said that the .NET for WebAssembly support is part of the broader .NET 5 wave, which is scheduled all the way out through like November of next year. We don't expect to need to wait that long to get Blazor for WebAssembly shipped. Right now we're running on mono.wasm, a mono build of WebAssembly, and we expect to ship a first version of Blazor on top of those bits. Eventually, though, we want to take mono.wasm and .NET Core and all the .NETs and merge them together into .NET 5. So eventually in the .NET 5 wave, you should expect like a newer version of the WebAssembly support that has been fully aligned with all the .NET 5 bits. So instead of mono.wasm, it'll be .NET 5 WASM, whatever that turns out to be. If I had to guess about when the first Blazor for WebAssembly release will go out, my gut is like early-ish next year, like Q1 of next year. And this is not a committed release date. Like these aren't things that I can say like you should plan like if you're trying to build some mission-critical production web application, don't use these dates to plan that just yet. Just to give you a feel of how we think about it. I would. Q1 of next year feels about right. There has been some discussion of like, well, could we get it done by the end of this year? My gut is that'll be a little bit tight, but that has been discussed as well. I think Q1 of next year is more realistic, but we'll see. As soon as we have a firm roadmap for .NET for WebAssembly, we'll let you know. I mean, there just is, there's a bunch of work still to do there. If you've tried out the debugging experience for .NET for WebAssembly, it's cool. Like, it's great to see that you can hit breakpoints in the browser, but it's pretty rough. Like, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on debugging. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done on performance. If you want to do computationally intensive workloads in the browser right now with Blazor, it's not great for that. Like, you're not going to be doing blockchain mining in the browser with the bits that we currently have. We run this with an IL interpreted model right now. There's no JIT. We are working on AOT, and I know I've been saying that for a while, and I'm also still waiting for the first Blazor release that we can ship that actually has the AOTs in the box. We do now have AOT bits from the mono team that we are playing around with and using. The joke I've been telling people that build is we got to drop like a couple weeks ago, and it was great because it showed some performance improvements, but at the time it ran for about a quarter of a second before it crashed. That's been fixed. That's since been resolved, and it's just going to get better. I mean, AOT for .NET is not just about WebAssembly. Like we're going to use it for a bunch of other .NET 5 related technologies as well. So it's a broader investment. And hopefully soon. I don't know if Preview 6 is going to have AOT either. We have to see. We're still working through that with the Mono folks. But that's the second big long pull. The third big work item for .NET on WebAssembly is the app size. Like we need to drive the app size down. Honestly, we've been going the wrong direction. Like we've been sort of slowly creeping up a little bit bigger as more and more functionality makes it into the WebAssembly runtime. Just recently, we started to see some progress of rolling that back and trimming app size. There is a balance there with AOT because when you AOT bits, the bits do get larger. Like the .NET assemblies are actually fairly compact in comparison to a full WebAssembly AOT version of those assemblies. So there'll be some dialing there. Like we'll be reducing size on one hand, and then it'll get bigger because of AOT, and then we have to figure out, well, how much do we AOT so the app size is still reasonable, but we still want to get good runtime performance. Those are the performance knobs that we're going to be messing with.
Yeah, we've got a couple good questions here. Chris Santio is asking about debugging in Visual Studio. You're talking about the experience in Chrome where you can set a breakpoint and stuff like that. Eventually, the plan is to get that into Visual Studio as well, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So we have in-browser debugging for Blazor on WebAssembly, and we know how to do the Visual Studio version where Visual Studio attaches to a browser instance that has remote debugging already set up. Like VS launches the browser correctly, attaches to it, and you can hit breakpoints for code running in the browser from within Visual Studio. In fact, like we've done like prototype demos of that, but we expect to have that in the Visual Studio experience hopefully soon. Like it's not that far off. The Mono guys have done their side of the work. We just need to finish up the VS integration. I saw a question on here also about Edge and being able to debug in Edge. Originally, when we did the debugging support, it was Chrome only, and in our backs of our minds, we knew, well, eventually we'll also need to do it for Edge, and that'll be important. But a lot of web devs use Chrome. That seemed like a reasonable choice to go with initially.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the Edge team did us a huge favor, and just decided to replat on Chromium. And I wish I could say that was for us. That we went to them and said, instead of us implementing, Edge support, could you guys just, rewrite Edge on top of Chrome? That would make, Blazor much better. And I wish I could say that was how it went down. That's not how it went down. It just was a happy coincidence. But it's great. Yeah, you can now do the browser debugging with the new version of Edge that's based on Chromium.
Chris is also asking about unit testing around components themselves, and he said it's on the backlog, but there's no issues yet. So you guys probably are working on bigger things right now.
We would love to get that one. I talked about roadmap a little bit. Like Preview 6 is kind of the last big feature milestone for the .NET Core 3.0 release. Once we get into the RC releases, we're really just trying to do bug fixing and stabilizing. And so we're in that process right now of doing all the real hard cuts, like really trimming back to just what can we get away with, because there's only so much time left. I wish testing was going to make it in for 3.0 RTM, but we did end up having to push it out. We'll have to do it in like a 3.1 or some future release. We do plan to do it. There is an issue on GitHub. It is sitting in our backlog. I think some people have managed to hack up enough code to be able to unit test their components. So I think it's possible. It's just not super easy. We want to make it easy, and it'll come. Like first things first. Got to get the basics done.
Yeah, I think the story might be a little similar on this next one. People are asking about authentication on server-side Blazor.
Yeah, auth is in. So for Preview 6, we will have a full authentication story.
Nice.
If you go on GitHub and track down the auth issue, Steve Sanderson's been working on that, and that will ship in Preview 6.
And apparently my website needs a cert update. I will have to look into that. Thank you for letting me know. So we definitely have a release coming this year, so that is excellent news. We've had a lot of traffic at the Telerik booth talking about the excitement around Blazor, and people have asked us that question over and over again. And we've tried to support it by saying, look, we're going to go ahead and release our 1.0 because we know you guys are, going to have something very soon. So we shipped our 1.0 of the Telerik UI components.
Super cool. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, it's
So
awesome.
what that means for developers is they have support from us.
Mm-hmm.
So if they have a component of ours that they feel like isn't working the way they feel it's intended to work, they can file a support ticket, and we can check and see if that's a bug and collect feedback and those type of things directly through our support channel, which is amazing.
Yeah, I was trying out the Telerik grid actually in my talk. Like I got the chance to rip out the weather forecast table in the default Blazor template and replace it with a full Telerik grid and do sorting and paging and filtering. It's really great.
People are complimenting the shirt you wore yesterday.
Yeah. Thank you.
I thought it'd be fun to send Dan a shirt, and I was happy to see that you actually wore it on stage yesterday during your talk. So.
Yeah, well, it was my best looking shirt at the time,
So if you're listening to the show, not watching, I have a live stream that I do each Friday called Blazor State Has Changed, and there was not until very recently a Blazor logo. So
Yeah.
I created my own. It's a very familiar looking glove.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say what company because I've had some feedback already on this, but I call it the POW R glove. With the R like SignalR.
Okay.
POW R. That gets me. I'm not a lawyer, but that gets me around some issues. But it has the words Blazor across the knuckles, which is a fun little logo, and we've got some shirts that we printed up for it. Feel free to ask questions in the chat room. We've got about 10 more minutes left, so if you haven't got your question in yet, you need to probably get that in soon. So we're definitely looking at performance improvements and things coming with the client-side stuff. When you talk about AOT, is any of that stuff going to be compiled directly to WASM, or is AOT just for .NET code? Or
So AOT is taking your C# code and going all the way to WebAssembly. That is what we mean by that. Initially, what we expect that we'll do is we'll probably take some of CoreFX, like the base class libraries that make up .NET, and we'll do some sort of profile where we say, okay, let's AOT these parts of the core class libraries, string and dictionaries, like things that pretty much every app is going to want, and try and tune that for common web scenarios. And then I think we'll just ship Blazor with those pre-AOT'd bits that way. In the future, we also want to have the AOT toolchain available to anyone so that when you're writing your app and you want to do performance tuning for a particular code pass in your application, you can choose what you want to AOT and add that to your application. It is a mixed mode model. Like you shouldn't think of this as like, I'm going to take my entire app and AOT it to WebAssembly. I mean, conceptually, you can do that. The downside of doing that is that the app then does get very large. Like initial prototypes of this were showing like tens of megabytes to AOT everything in the app. Which, I mean, for some apps maybe that's okay. And if you really want the performance across the board, maybe that's what you do. But we think for most apps, that's probably not what they're going to want. They're going to want a mix so that you have this balance of app size and performance. So in the future, I think you'll have the tool chain where you can decide what you want to AOT. You can AOT some of your bits. You can AOT different parts of CoreFX and get the balance that works for you. We probably won't have that initially because the tool chain right now is pretty heavy. Like it involves a lot of pieces. Having all of them scripted and all these things. Hundreds of megabytes of tool chain, and we need to do some work to make that thing, easy to acquire and consume and use. But once we have it in shape, I think we will be making it available to everyone.
it sounds like a really powerful tool that you just have to use wisely. And Akira GTX is kind of asking the question you just answered, like how big will an AOT file get? What's the estimation? You kind of said, they can be tens of megs if you're not careful with how you set up the tooling.
Yeah, it's more like a growth factor. Like given this much .NET IL, if you AOT it, how big does that then become? And it gets larger. And it's not dissimilar to like when you what's it called when you take .NET IL and you like you cross-gen .NET IL into the native image of the OS. Like there is a similar growth factor that occurs there. I mean, we're working on trying to make that as small as we can, but it is pretty significant. Like 2x, 3x. The numbers are not unreasonable to think about. I think the bits that I actually just was asking the devs about the drop that the mono guys gave us, and I think they said that with the pieces that they had AOT'd, which wasn't everything in the Blazor app, not even it was like a bunch of performance benchmarks. The app size had grown to like 15 megs, which obviously that's too big. Like we need to figure something out there to make that much smaller. And that's the engineering work that's happening. This is part of the reason why .NET for WebAssembly needs some more time. It's not going to be done in the 3.0 time frame by September. We need to work through all these things.
Yeah, personally, I'd rather have this goes with any tools, includes ours. I'd rather have it done right and later than done now and not done right. And that's one of the things, I won't get too much on a pedestal here, but we decided to build our Telerik UI components for Blazor natively and not take our existing JavaScript stuff and just shove it into Blazor with wrappers. We wanted to build them right so you have all the native features out of the box like templating and validation, and you're working with the render tree properly and all of those things you'd expect. But same thing goes for what you're talking about. I'd rather have you guys take the time to make it right and not have big files shipping down the wire.
That's our goal. The good news though is that you do get the perf back. Like when in our testing, we have seen doing AOT bits gets us pretty close to like normal .NET Core performance levels running in the browser. So that'll be pretty hot.
And Lewis was asking if you'd elaborate just a little bit more on Preview 6 auth. Is that server and client or just server-side auth?
It's server and client authentication story. And a lot of that work is doing the plumbing and infrastructure so that you have access to the user identity through your components, so you can make authentication decisions about who not really make app decisions about who the current user is. So yeah, it's both hosting models. It's intended to be hosting model agnostic, I guess is what I would say.
Mr. Magoo is asking about exception handling in Blazor. I'm assuming he meant client side because I think this is a little more client centric of a problem. A lot of times you see errors that fail kind of silently.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's not good.
Sometimes you have to dig into the console to see a big red pile of error messages and things like that. He was just asking.
Hopefully, if it shows up in the console, hopefully that's not a silent error. Then, like that's kind of where you would expect the stack trace spew to appear, would be in the dev console. If you're not seeing that, like you had an exception an uncaught exception that got thrown and nothing showed up, like that would be something that we would need to follow up on and file bugs. Like that's really more of a runtime concern. So you should file issues on the mono repo and let them know, and we'll get those things fixed.
Mr. Magoo is elaborating and saying he gets complete browser lockups. So I think it might be time to file an issue on GitHub there.
Yeah, file bugs on the mono repo for those, or if you think it's in the upper layers, like if you think it's lockups happening in the Blazor UI framework itself, like let us know that those issues can go on the ASP.NET Core repo. We should look at those.
And Stephen is asking, Stephen Kramer, he's asking if there's anything that's changing with WASM, direct access to the DOM. Currently you have to use JavaScript interop to interact directly with the DOM. Does WebAssembly have any future bits that are doing that type of work?
So there's nothing in WebAssembly that prevents you from accessing the DOM. I mean, you can, from WebAssembly you can access anything in JavaScript, and from JavaScript you can do whatever you want with the DOM. There are post MVP specs that are being worked on in the WebAssembly working group.
Okay.
Post MVP I think means minimal viable protocol or format. I don't remember what they used for that acronym. But there are extensions to the WebAssembly spec that make a bunch of improvements to the experience there. Like one of them, I believe, was like the threading work, which I think Chrome actually now has implemented the new threading spec. So maybe we'll get threads support in Blazor running in the browser. The direct access to DOM objects was, I believe, was one of those extension specs. And honestly, I haven't looked at the status of those specs in a little while. I have to go check to see where that's at, but that's not. It's something you can do today. Like if you want to go grab an HTML element and do something with it in JavaScript from a Blazor app, you can do that through the JavaScript interop mechanisms. Where you tend to run into issues is there's two layers to Blazor. There's the .NET on WebAssembly layer, like mono.wasm, which anyone can grab and go use and just write whatever .NET code they want that runs in the browser. And then there's the Blazor UI framework that's built on top, and that framework is where you get components and Razor syntax and that sort of application model. When you're using the Blazor UI framework, Blazor works much like how existing JavaScript front-end frameworks work, like Angular and React, where the components render into an in-memory representation of the DOM, and then the Blazor runtime looks at what was rendered, looks at what was rendered before, runs a diffing algorithm to calculate the difference, and then very intelligently applies that diff to the actual live DOM. And that's nice because it's more performant. What that means, though, is that Blazor kind of expects to own the DOM. Like if it needs to know what the state of the DOM is. If you have JavaScript like hopping in and messing around with elements, it doesn't know that you did that, and that will mess up the diffing algorithm calculations. So you can manipulate the DOM. You just have to be careful that if you're also using Blazor and components for that section of the DOM, then those things can step on each other's toes.
Yeah, that was one of the R&D points that we hit when we were deciding how to build our teller components, because we're like, if we use JavaScript interop to wrap something, we're circumventing the render tree, and that's going to be a bad thing. So even if it's through JavaScript or there's some WASM direct way to do it, it's probably something you want to avoid when working with Blazor anyway. Chris Santi was asking if you guys have done any research into large-scale Blazor applications and thought of lazy loading models and things like that.
Yeah, we get that question quite a bit about wanting to load different parts of the apps in a lazy way. And we've had this on our backlog actually pretty much from the beginning of even when Blazor was experimental, which by the way, it's not anymore. It's official preview, which is really cool. But we had in the back of our minds that eventually we probably will want to do some sort of lazy loading thing. We haven't prioritized it very high. And the reason right now is that, the reason why you do lazy loading is, you're saying that part of my app I want to load initially, and then later these other parts of the apps, if I need them, then I'll download them, but I don't want to download them up front. With Blazor apps, because the runtime kind of dwarfs the app size, the initial download of just getting the runtime down pretty much dominates the app size. The DLLs for your application are actually pretty small, and they compress pretty well. So you download this really big thing, and then you have these little like little drops in the bucket that you could lazy load later. But at least for most Blazor apps, it doesn't help that much in comparison to the large download that you already had to do. So because of that characteristic, we haven't really prioritized it very high yet. As the runtime gets smaller, that concern becomes more interesting. You can be like, oh no, but I have these other chunks of apps that maybe I'll trim out and load lazily. Also, and as apps get bigger, of course, this does start to dominate. So yeah, we haven't really had an app large enough yet where it made sense to do that, but it is on our backlog, and it is something we do eventually plan to do. It won't be in the first version.
Yeah, there's also the server-side aspect as well. And we've had questions, not right this second, but we've had questions on Twitter this week about does SignalR as a service work with Blazor server-side?
Yeah. In fact, one of the cool things you can do now with the latest preview release of Visual Studio. So if you're using Blazor and you're using .NET Core 3.0, make sure you're using Visual Studio Preview Channel. Don't use Visual Studio 2019, the RTM bits. There are new tooling enhancements in the preview channel that you will need actually for .NET Core 3.0. I think a bunch of people have been hitting issues with that because they were trying to use the stable channel of ES. Make sure you're using the preview channel. If you use the latest Preview 3 release from the preview channel, 16.1 Preview 3, and the .NET Core 3.0 Preview 5 bits, there's a cool scenario you can do now where you create a Blazor server-side app, and then you go to publish to Azure. When you publish, there's an option to add dependencies to your app. Like you can add, SQL Server database. You can add Azure SignalR service. When you add the Azure SignalR service, the tooling will add an additional NuGet package to your application, which is the Azure SignalR Service SDK. And then without you having to touch any of your code, you can then publish your application and it will wire up the Azure SignalR Service for you, just as a no-touch solution. In the future, we even plan to go a step further where we will have some detection logic where we can look at your app and say, oh, this app's using SignalR and they're about to publish to Azure App Service. They're probably going to want Azure SignalR Service so they can do scale out. And so we can offer to you at that point, like, hey, do you want us to add the Azure SignalR Service? Looks like you're using SignalR and you probably would want this.
Will Clippy help me with that?
It's right. No, we'll basically, it is kind of intelligent. Like it'll scan through, because figuring out if an app is using SignalR is not completely trivial. It involves like looking through your code a little bit, but we have figured out a way to do that in a reasonable way. So we can detect that you're using SignalR, which is what's being used by Blazor server side, and then help you light up the Azure SignalR service. And that you can do today with the existing bits, just with a manual step of adding the Azure SignalR service yourself. But you don't have to change any code anymore, which is pretty nice.
So Stephen, I see your question. I'm going to skip and come back because Lewis's question is a little bit more on topic still. We have a question about SignalR, and this isn't the SignalR channel that you use for server side, but rather a question on SignalR if you're consuming it as a client.
Right.
So currently you have to use a JavaScript interop if you want to interact with SignalR.
At some layer, yeah. There's 2 layers you could plug in. And I think community members have done both. You can just wrap the Azure, the SignalR JavaScript client in JS interop code, and that works. The other technique is, I know someone took the .NET SignalR client and ripped out the transport layer and put some JavaScript interop code there, and that worked as well. We're debating internally, actually, what variant do we want to do for the Microsoft shipped SignalR client so that it just works out of the box with Blazor on WebAssembly. There will probably be some maybe slimmed down version, I think, of the .NET SignalR client. It's still kind of under debate right now. One piece that we still need to do is we need to get updated monobits that light up the WebSocket support. Like they've already done, in some sense, the JavaScript interop worked for accessing the WebSocket transport. That should actually, I think it might even just make the .NET SignalR client work as is. So I haven't actually tried it, but that might just work then. Kind of how the like the HTTP client just sort of works.
So there's a potential that code's there, just needs to get bubbled up to a public API.
Yeah, and then we might need to do some work on the SignalR client itself just to trim it down, like make it lighter weight for browser-based scenarios.
Okay. Awesome. I'll go back to Stephen's question real quick here. So Stephen Kramer, Stephen has worked on Blazor dual mode.
Yeah.
He was asking if anything has been put in the framework to help transition apps from server to client in a similar way.
So for, a little history. We used to have a reasonable way that you could flip an app between server side and client side. We made some changes that made this really hard, or maybe even not quite as possible. The dual mode was a great project that made it trivial, where I think you just like put a query string parameter and you could flip it back and forth. In Preview 6, we did have a work item to make it easy again. And I have seen that issue has been resolved. Because of build, I haven't actually had a chance to go look at what was done, so I can't really speak to what the new experience is, which is a little embarrassing. But go on GitHub and look in the closed issues for Preview 6. You'll find a bug there that was filed to make it easy again, to flip between the 2 hosting models. It has already been closed for Preview 6, and you should see some details there about what we did to make that experience much more straightforward. I mean, the component model is the same. Like we used literally the same component model types for Blazor on WebAssembly and Blazor for server. So I mean, conceptually, this absolutely should work, and it's just a matter of putting things in the right places so that the apps can be easily transitioned. You will still need to make sure that you're writing your app in a hosting model agnostic way. Like if you're writing code in your component that talks directly to the database, and assuming that you're on the server, and then you try to flip that to run on the client, well, that's not going to work because you don't have access directly to the database from the client. So make sure you put appropriate service abstractions in that your components talk to, that you can then swap out the implementations of for server-specific implementations or client-specific implementations.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the best approaches I've seen. And I kind of grabbed something that Steve had demoed at the NDC London, where he had, I think he called it shell apps, so that's what I called it on my demo as well, where you can take all of the component code and pages and routing and everything, stick that in a .NET Core, or no, sorry, it's a Blazor lib project.
A class library?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Class library, and it doesn't have the deployment model attached to it at all. Then you just create a shell that has the deployment model.
Yep, that works
And
today. You can do multiple apps. If you want to have one, I think dual mode was all about, I just have one app and I kind of just flip a switch and the app magically transitions to either. But you absolutely can just take all your components out, put them in like a class library or multiple class libraries, and then just have multiple shell apps that reference those same components, and that works too, and that actually works pretty well.
And in the demo that I did, each shell had its own implementation of the interface to fetch data. So when you move from one to the other, the app just picks up that service and runs with it. And it's either talking directly to any framework or it talks over HTTP, and you don't have to worry about where it's being deployed at that point.
That is the beauty of dependency injection.
Yes.
Makes
So
that
I
easy.
think that's maybe the next step. So you might start with dual mode, and then you start running into, well, my data's coming from different places now, and then you have to kind of transition into something bigger like that.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time, so let's take one more question here, and then we'll have some closing remarks. Let's see, I saw it in here a second ago. Chris had a really interesting one that I haven't seen yet. He's saying that imports.razor is somewhat painful, and he was wondering if there's a way to wildcard, I assume, using statements.
I'm guessing this is the namespaces. That's what he's talking about. Because we made a change in the last preview where components now are resolved just by their type name in the in-scope namespaces. Like it used to be, you would write components, and if you had them in a different class library, if you wanted to import those components into your application, you would use this add tag helper directive, which was super weird. It was like, tag helpers? Like, I'm not dealing with tag helpers, I'm dealing with components. Why do I have to do this? And it was just because that's how we had managed to get the functionality to work at the time. But we now have a more first-class model for dealing with components, which is, well, components are just types. They're just .NET types. They have a name and a namespace. If that type is in scope, you can use it. And you can even, for the element name, you can use the full name of the type now instead of the just the type name. Like if you want to do, my namespace dot counter, then that works. Where I think that hit some people on when they were migrating code, because you had all these components that now all of a sudden they're all in different namespaces, and you had to get all the right using statements in place in order to get your code to work. And the error experience is not great. Like when a component is not recognized as a component, you get these bizarre errors, and you're like, what is going on? And then you realize, like, oh, I just didn't have the namespace in it because it's not recognizing this element as a component. So things that we're doing to help out there, we're gonna try and make that error experience better. Like when we see something that looks like you're trying to do a component there, but we don't know which component it is because we can't resolve that type name, we'll give you a better error experience around that. So that will help. We're also adding support for the namespace directive, which will allow you to explicitly specify what the namespace for a component is, and you can apply that using imports.razor in sort of a broad way.
Excellent.
So if you just want to dump all your components into the same namespace, and then you have one using statement, you can do that, and then put your components in whatever folder you want. We'll be doing that as well.
I think that was the answer that people were looking for, is at namespace directive. We'll alleviate a bunch of that, and I think that may be something that we were looking forward to as well. One of the feedback pieces we got from Scott Hunter was, you guys say telerik a lot in your components. I was like, yeah, but that's a namespace issue that we didn't perceive, because we wanted to make sure that if somebody built their own grid or tab strip or something,
They wouldn't collide.
they wouldn't collide.
Ah, yeah.
So we prefixed them because there was no namespace support, and then we got namespace support, and it almost got us there. It almost got us over the finish line, but the at namespace directive will get us the rest of the way.
Oh, good. So the telerik components, you think the names might shorten up a little bit?
They might shorten up a little bit. I can't say for certain. We have to actually build it and make sure it runs and works. But the concept that we have is exactly what Janescu's saying in the chat room. You should be able to say, import Telerik and then just say grid, or you could say in brackets Telerik.grid.
Yeah.
If you want to.
Yep.
So if you end up with two and they're colliding, you can specify namespace.grid.
Just like you would in C# code, right? Like if you need to fully qualify the namespace. Another feature that might be nice that we don't currently have on the backlog, but we also be like aliasing namespaces. Like sometimes you do that in C# as well to help with these issues. We don't currently have support for that, but we might need to put that one on the backlog as well. So that might help in some of those scenarios too.
So any final closing thoughts?
Well, just first of all, thank you to everyone who's been using Blazor and giving feedback. Like we get hundreds of survey responses, people building cool stuff. Like I was looking at the awesome Blazor site just earlier today, and the number of links of community projects that people have put together is just phenomenal. It's because of all that we've gotten to where we are, that Blazor is now going to ship. It's part of the .NET 5 wave to have full WebAssembly support in .NET, and that is great. And I just, thank you for everything that people have been doing, and we've got a lot more exciting stuff coming down the pipe. And keep using the bits, sending us feedback, and we'll keep making Blazor better.
And I just want to say I'm very lucky to have the audience that I do, because this is like the all-star team of Blazor.
Oh.
Like I'm fortunate to have the folks that come into the chat room that are building all the really cool stuff, and then I get to showcase that on a stream, and it's their hard work I'm showing off usually. So thank you guys for joining us again and asking Dan questions on the fly here. Dan, thank you so much for giving us some of your time during a very busy build.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
And we're going to sign off now, guys. Thank you very much for joining us on the stream again. And if you're listening on the Eat, Sleep, Code podcast, we'll have show notes and all those great things up on Telerik.com.
Bye.